Then let's begin with a word of prayer. Father, as you well know, it's our nature to respond to self-preservation. When we're pushed, we tend to defend ourselves and to hide. We ask, Father, that in our lives, those times when we're asked to stand up for your Son, that you give us the courage, the strength, and the will to do so and not run away. This we ask in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you.
All right. Well, all four Gospels, pick your poison.
I seem to be doing Mark, so I'll go
Still,
with Mark.
you got Mark, okay?
Okay, I'll do Matthew.
Matthew,
Looks like I do Luke now.
you got Luke. Oh, we have, I heard another door slam, so looks like John will be picked up from another perspective.
Which one are you taking? Luke.
She's doing Luke. Why don't you do John?
What? So,
Gospel of John.
so I'll take John then?
Yeah.
Okay.
And you can take me out to breakfast.
Oh.
I'll take John. Sorry, I couldn't resist it. Apologize.
John
18. There we go. All right. It's 9 o'clock in the evening, Thursday, April 6th, 30 AD. They are in the Garden of Gethsemane on the Mount of Olives in Judea in Canaan. We'll start with Mark 14:43, one verse. The other two you can follow along. They're the same basic thing.
And immediately, while he was still speaking, Judas came, one of the 12, and with him a crowd with swords and clubs from the chief priests and the scribes and the elders.
Okay, so as you know, they're in the garden, and Jesus saw the torches coming in his direction, and he went back, woke them up, got them all together, and now they waited, and now it's happening. What do you see? Anything odd?
Judas, of course, away from the other 12, so we
Right?
could show the bad guys what was going on here.
That's right. Judas is definitely the leading here, as was expected.
They're coming armed.
They are coming armed with clubs. Oh, not
Oh.
batons.
Well, I mean, that was probably standard fare for an arrest.
Yes, especially if you have a group that you're going to arrest.
Yeah.
You want to arrest them, not just slay them. If you
Mhm.
can kill them, okay, but if you want to chop something up, better to beat them on the head into submission. Okay, anything else? Who sent them?
Chief priests, scribes, and elders, so the church mucky-mucks.
The synagogue,
Synagogue,
temple,
yes,
the
I'm
mucky-mucks.
sorry.
But religious leaders as opposed to Romans.
Correct. Most people think it's the Romans. Okay? But they're sent by the religious establishment. Okay, anything else? John 18, verses 2 and 3. Let's see what John adds.
Now Judas also, who was betraying him, knew the place where Jesus had often met there with his disciples. Judas then, having received the Roman cohort and officers from the chief priests and the Pharisees, came there with lanterns and torches and weapons.
Okay, what has John added?
He says there's a Roman cohort. with
He's
them.
added the Roman cohort. Okay, so he's added Roman soldiers to this group. Okay? Anything else?
So a Roman cohort could also be an observer for the Romans.
Well, yes, it could be. That's correct.
But, and then they added light,
Good.
which of course, because it's dark.
It's definitely. So other than that, it's nothing surprising. So he's referred it again to a betrayal. Okay, he who will betray him. And he's added the Romans. Anything else?
Well, is it the Pharisees, which is different from the scribes and elders?
That is also correct. It's also different from the chief priests.
Mhm.
So he's added the religious establishment. And again, remember, John, in my opinion, is a Jerusalem or Judean written source. He knows the South, not so much the North. That's the gospel, the three Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. John is added his own material, but almost always he knows the southern area and Jerusalem. Okay, so we tend to pay a lot of attention to him when he's down south. Okay, here we go. Thus, about 9 p.m. on Thursday, Judas arrived in Gethsemane, guiding an armed force. They're over here in Gethsemane, and they come from here somewhere to here. Any question on that? Majority of the force consisted of the temple guard sent by the Sanhedrin, a small detachment of Roman soldiers from the cohort station at the fortress Antonia as observers and backup, and a few representatives of the Pharisees only as observers, along with some slaves to carry torches. Questions?
So it's quite a group of people.
Yeah, well, they were coming out against 11 disciples and Jesus and maybe a few others. They were coming out prepared for a riot, a little group meeting. And so you have the Romans to back them up. That was agreed to by the Sanhedrin. Okay?
And realistically, when they started out to go there, they wouldn't know necessarily how many people are going to be there.
They had Judas.
They had Judas to tell them, but when he says 12, could others have followed? You know,
Oh, yeah.
In other words,
Jesus often taught
yeah.
over there.
So you probably want an overwhelming force.
Correct. And so you send your own religious establishment's guard. Okay? It's their troops that are coming out, or police officers, whatever you want to call them. But they're backed up by the feds. Mm-hmm. Okay? And you have to have, and they're going to watch. They don't want to get involved. They're going to watch. Okay? But if need be, they can move in. And then you've got the Pharisees who are going to watch the whole thing happen. They're there to make sure it goes a certain way. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, do you understand it now? Okay, so it's not just Romans coming out there, as many people think. Here we go. Mark 14, 44 and 45.
Now the betrayer had given them a sign, saying, "The one I will kiss is the man. Seize him and lead him away under guard." And when he came, he went up to him at once and said, "Rabbi," and he kissed him.
Does something sound strange here? Is this normal? What strikes you?
Well, so most of us would consider a kiss not for betrayal, but to show affection.
Correct.
And of course, he's using it for the opposite.
But that's our culture.
Yes.
Now that's the standard greeting. Okay? And it's just a kiss on the two cheeks, or one cheek depending. And it's just a standard formal greeting. No big deal. Doesn't mean anything weird. Okay? But that's the signal now. He says, I'm going to give you this sign. This is what they said. You have to lead us. You have to take it to him. You have to identify him for us. Okay? Mm-hmm. That way all the guards would know who it was they were after.
And as you say, giving his leader a kiss was nothing unusual.
Right. Absolutely not. At least that's according to Mark. It seems no big deal. Okay, any question? Well, there's more. Let's go to Matthew 26, 48 through 50.
Okay. Now the betrayer had given them a sign, saying, "The one I will kiss is the man, arrest him." At once he came to Jesus and said, "Greetings, Rabbi," and kissed him. Jesus said to him, "Friend, do what you are here to do." Then they came and laid hands on Jesus and arrested him.
So, what does Matthew add?
Well,
Friend.
Jesus.
Yeah.
Friend.
Jesus called him friend.
Yeah.
mm-hmm.
I don't see you know, the thing that Judas is a nasty, greedy person just doesn't fit,
Yeah.
to my opinion. Okay? Friend, do what you have come for. In other words, let's get it done.
But we always, we being people, villainize the person who does something that we don't want to happen.
Absolutely. We always look at the most negative we can at them. That's just the way we are. Okay? During a war, your enemy is ugly, nasty, and mean, even if they're normal people. Than usual. You know, it's just, that's the way we are. And that's the way they were then. We have to remember that. Okay? Anything else? Okay, now Luke 47b and 48. I'll read that because whenever I split, it's terrible. And he, that's Judas, approached Jesus to kiss him. But Jesus said to him, Judas, are you betraying the Son of Man with a kiss? Now, what's different about Luke's perspective on this?
Jesus is identifying himself as that prophetic
The Son of Man, correct. Okay, and he's acknowledging a betrayal. Okay, but it's betrayal that Jesus knew about. It looks like a betrayal, and it is in the sense that Judas is doing it for his own purpose. Okay, but it's not nasty and mean. Judas was doing it for what he thought was the right reason. Any questions, thoughts, or comments?
So,
Go ahead.
Jesus has been around in the area for,
A week.
some time. But they still felt it was necessary to be sure they get the right guy.
Well, that doesn't mean every guard knew who he was.
Okay.
This way, once you identify him specifically, this is the one, all the guards would have seen that and know specifically the one they're after. The Romans would know, everybody would know who it was they were after. That's my opinion. Yes?
Well, the only, and I know there's no answer to this, but the one thing that we as humans have always asked is if Judas was chosen by God and Jesus knew to do this deed, and yet he admitted he knew that Jesus was the Son of Man,
Yes.
would he, at his death, would he have been absolved by God and taken to heaven?
Would Judas be forgiven?
Yes.
Okay? I will give you a brief perspective. He killed himself.
Yes.
That shows a hopelessness and not lack of faith, doesn't it? I'll leave you to that perspective. For Judas, if he has a lack of faith, a lack of hope, can he be saved?
Okay.
I'll
Well,
leave it to you.
we also have one gospel that says it would be better if he had not been born, but we don't know if that is a divine or a human reaction.
Good point. We don't know that. I personally think it would be a human. His life would be miserable because of it. But okay. Anything else? Okay. Judas came directly up to Jesus, saying, "Greetings, teacher," and kissed his cheek, as was appropriate when greeting a friend. But Jesus said softly to Judas, "You hand me over with a kiss?" Any question? Please note the religious authorities here are doing the arresting. John 18, 4 through 9.
Jesus therefore, knowing all the things that were coming upon him, went forth and said to them, Whom do you seek? They answered him, Jesus the Nazarene. He said to them, I am he. And Judas also, who was betraying him, was standing with them. When therefore he said to them, I am he, they drew back and fell to the ground. Again therefore he asked them, Whom do you seek? And they said, Jesus the Nazarene. Jesus answered, I told you that I am he. If therefore you seek me, let these go their way. that the word might be fulfilled which he spoke. Of those whom thou hast given me, I lost not one.
Okay, now there's a lot to walk through here. What do you see?
Well, with people rabbiting around this situation, really, for the Jews and for the Romans, that's a better deal, because now they only have one to deal with.
They haven't rabbited yet.
Well, oh yeah, okay, yeah, that's true.
Okay,
Yeah.
so what do you got? What's your thought?
Well, there's that old I am he, and there's power there. But he's using the I am, which is...
Mhm. Yeah.
Ego eimi, yes.
So
Okay,
I can't give you the exact Greek or
I'll
Hebrew
explain
translation.
that in a few moments.
Okay.
Okay, we want to notice that. What else?
He's trying to protect the disciples, it sounds like.
Yes, he's definitely trying to get them freed from being arrested.
Yeah.
Right. Anything else?
Well,
Come on, I know you'll see it.
when it says they drew back and fell to the ground, I'm wondering if this was a clown reaction, overreaction on the part of the Hebrew people because they saw that he used the forbidden phrase.
That's a very good perspective. We'll look at that. Okay, anything else? There's one last thing I really want you to notice.
Jesus is being very specific there. He's saying, whom do you seek?
Yes.
So I don't know if that's what you're
Okay.
talking about.
One. Oh, come on. We were just talking about. Here we go. It says at the end, of those whom you have given me, I have lost not one. That might even mean Judas.
Yeah.
He didn't lose Judas.
And this was
That's a
also,
guess.
that we know that this was predicted
Yep.
beforehand, so
Yep.
part of the,
So you,
Prophecy.
but you specifically asked about Judas.
yeah.
So that's my comment is, here he says he was not lost. And yet, of course, Dante sticks him in the seventh pit of hell, wrong with Satan as the great betrayer. So, I mean,
Well, then I was reading something, I don't know, last week or the week before, and it hit me also. And at some point, when Jesus was talking to the disciples and telling them, what would happen later, he said, well, I tell you that in heaven you will...
the 12 will rule.
12 will, and
Yeah.
will be rulers.
Yeah,
And Judas was there.
how about that? So let's not count him out. I really just don't think it's
We'll
appropriate.
know for sure when we get there.
Yeah, what doesn't mean, yeah, we'll know that. Okay, so, noted there's,
The other thing
good.
that pops out at me about Judas is that I'm reading Matthew right now, and there is a point in Matthew where he talks, it's at the point of the transfiguration, and he talks about that the 12 disciples will sit on the 12 thrones
right,
in heaven. Well, if they're still,
That's where
to me,
I-
that makes
yeah.
me think, at this point,
right,
as you said in that last sentence, Judas wasn't lost in the end.
yeah. That's
Okay.
what Ann was referring to.
Yeah.
Yeah,
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 that's
where I-
exactly
right,
right.
and so it makes me, I've always felt that he was, for lack of a better way to put it, was set up. And he
Okay.
didn't have a support structure that he could count on to talk him through it, that he could go to. And so God's fulfilled
Uh-huh.
this,
Prophecy, yeah.
whatever you want to call it.
Right. So, Judas may have been misrepresented all this time, these 2,000 years or whatever it's been.
Well, he's being represented by people's thoughts,
Yeah,
not God's.
That's right. So I just say, let's read the scripture and see what it has to say, and we can allow that to work in our own heads. Okay, notice that there are two moments where he has to respond saying that he is who he is. Okay? And there's two entirely different reactions. Okay? I want to point that out because we're going to run into that. Okay, then Jesus turned to the force and said, "Who are you looking for?" The leader responded, "They sought Jesus of Nazareth." Okay, right? Well, here we go now. "Yahweh, I am, ego eimi," responded Jesus. At the name of God as given to Moses, the religious people stepped back in the face of such a bold statement. They fell to the ground even. You see it? That's who the Romans are going, huh? Whatever. But for the religious people who understood, that's a scary thing to say. The word of God, the name of God, and call upon him. Oh, that's my opinion. That's why they fell back when he said Yahweh. Any question or thought?
Okay, so how, I know it's like I am that I am,
Yeah.
but I am he. Did somehow that, the way the language is, indicate that he was claiming to be Yahweh, or was it just...
Simply by saying the name of God, or saying Egoimi is the Greek one, or Yahweh, you are saying the name of God. So you're calling God's presence at the very least to be right here. And you just don't dare say the name of God. You say Adonai or Yah, Jehovah, or whatever you want. Don't say the name of God. You don't call upon God. And he did. And they just go, whoa!
There's also evidence in the Old Testament where people were destroyed by God.
Yeah.
And there's no question in these guys' minds that God has the power to do that.
That's right. So it freaked them. It simply freaked them because of the way he said it and what he said. Okay? I think that's reasonable. It's the only way I can see why they would fall back. So here comes the second round. But when the Romans, bewildered by the response of the Jews, asked again for Jesus of Nazareth, Jesus simply said, I am he. Okay, any questions? Then we're going to Mark 14, 46 through 50.
And they laid hands on him and seized him. But one of those who stood by drew his sword and struck the servant of the high priest and cut off his ear. And Jesus said to them, have you come out as against a robber with swords and clubs to capture me? Day after day I was with you in the temple teaching, and you did not seize me. But let the scriptures be fulfilled. And they all left him and fled.
Okay, what's happening?
Well, here's where the people rabbit.
Yeah, they'll finally rabbit out of this one. But before they do, what happens?
One of
them, whomever it was, okay, takes his sword, knife, whatever it is, and he cuts an ear.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
Cut off his ear.
I love it. They always say the whole thing gets chopped off. They love to do that. But it is the slave or servant of the high priest. Anything strike you here? Anything different, odd, strange, wonderful?
Well, so Jesus did not intend a military takeover, and this person probably still didn't get it, no doubt.
But then again, Jesus said, did you go off and get me those 2 weapons I asked for? Earlier, he said, that's enough. They had 2. Okay? So he wanted them present.
Mm-hmm.
And now somebody is going to use one of them in his defense. In defense against, in Jesus' defense. And he actually strikes out and chops off a piece of flesh. Okay?
Could part of it be true that the people he'd been talking to and trying to call to him into God's presence weren't listening? So if they aren't listening anyway, what do they need the ear for?
Well, servants or slaves really don't have much choice in what they got to do in those days. You do what you're told, or it's your ear that gets chopped off. Okay, anything else strike you? He's reminding them that they could have arrested him at any time, right? Mm-hmm. Right there in public.
Yeah.
And he's saying, you're trying to do this in secret.
But we also know why they didn't want the crowds to
They
get
didn't want
riled
the
up.
crowds to defend him. He knew that. He
Yeah.
knew that. He knew what was going on. Anything else?
I don't know, I suspect Jesus' words to the people that were arresting him might have been to embarrass them.
I'm sure it was. It was I'm sure it was. I know what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
These high priests were a funny group too. Apparently they weren't against violence and all this. I know they didn't want Jesus to take over their leadership and all this, but just seems like, why are they there?
Okay, there's only one high priest, the chief priest, but there are the religious establishment. The Pharisees are there, and yeah, they're not anathema to violence. They have no problem using it appropriately.
But they were also afraid of what Jesus could do to their position in life.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Oh, yeah, we know that most people are happy to see change that affects them, right?
Now, we know that later a lot of the trial stuff was done illegally. Was doing something at this time of night, was that bordering on illegal, or
No.
that was still okay?
That's not a problem.
Okay.
That's not a problem. They just want to do it away from the crowds. Okay, here we go. Luke 22, 49 through 51.
And when those who were about him saw what would follow, they said, Lord, shall we strike with the sword? And one of them struck the slave of the high priest and cut off his right ear. But Jesus said, no more of this. And he touched his ear and healed him.
Okay, what? Wait a minute, this doesn't make sense, does it? What do you see? What's different?
Well, it's right in keeping with what Jesus did throughout his ministry. I mean, he was the healer,
Yeah, oh, that's true.
and
true.
this slave that had his ear chopped off probably was doing as ordered. He probably, you know, he's no enemy of Jesus, so to speak.
Not personally.
He happened to be there.
They're doing what a slave has to do, what
Yeah.
he's told.
It does seem odd to me in that while Jesus is being arrested, he would have the opportunity to reach up and heal an ear.
Interesting. Yes, well, apparently he was able to get some time in there.
Yeah.
But we'll have to look at that. We haven't got that point yet. We're going to continue looking at this phrase here and what happened. What's the sequence here? And then I'll explain why that would happen. Okay, so let's look at it. Okay. Lord, shall we strike with the sword? Now that's odd that he's added this. He's asking permission from Jesus to use his sword.
Is it time to take over the world?
Yeah, remember, they think it's going to be an earthly kingdom. Okay, now, did Jesus say, yep, go ahead? And so the guy struck out and cut off the ear of the slave. Is that what happened? I don't know. It's difficult. You know, Luke has added this phrase. Lord.
Jesus didn't say anything in response to the question. It just,
Right. So then the person took that as an affirmative and went with his sword. Maybe someone was drawing weapons. Of course, they drew their weapons. There were a couple weapons. Others would start drawing weapons, of course. And he said, ha! And he hacked off.
Well, I think he probably actually missed what he was trying to do.
You think maybe he was trying to hit something else and got the ear instead.
Yeah.
Maybe I think that's...
You know, like this, and it just slid down.
Well, and
I've never tried to use a sword.
we know Jesus had at least one impetuous follower that would react.
Really? Just one?
At least one.
Oh, okay. Good point. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, he had two zealots, remember? One here
Yeah.
was acting as a betrayer, but there was still Simon the zealot who would love to attack these people. Okay? So then you have the impulsive one who is always wrong.
Why did they pick the slave to cut off his ear?
Well, it's not that they picked him. You know, they drew a lottery and he lost. And I'm just kidding. You know, who lost? Who got the number 3? Ah, you. Come on. I'm going to cut your. He was probably just close enough, and he didn't have. He wasn't armed enough to warrant scaring the disciple enough that he wouldn't attack. In other words, he was available. He was close enough, probably, to be attacked.
Or maybe he did have some kind of a weapon and
Well, they
was
would've.
starting to raise it, but
Yeah.
then this other disciple whacked at it.
He
and
would
just-
have had some sort of weapon, but he would have been close enough to be available to be hit with. Now we call it a sword. Now it could just, you know, a sword. You know, they're 3 foot long, and you know the good knights of the armor. So, but it could have just been a little 12, 18-inch blade.
We
More than
know.
likely it was, because in
Yes.
Rome at that time, the most popular weapon that a soldier had was the short sword.
The short sword.
Because it got him in close with that, so
Yes.
that the person on the opposite side, who would have had a longer sword theoretically, they would not
Would not be able to
nullify.
use it.
Yeah, so my thought would be is that it probably was more of a short sword, or
Right.
as you call it, a knife,
Right.
like what a butcher might use.
Yeah. 12 to 18 inches
Yeah, that would be
more than
perfect,
enough.
because if he's close enough to this gentleman, and I'm with Ann that he was close, there was, that reaching out, and that unfortunately, the slave was turned just enough that that slave's poor ear got in the way.
Yeah. And later, it is said, in tradition at the very least, that this slave would become a follower. Okay, this is kind of his, what do you call it, his,
Rest of the story.
yeah, okay.
This is his introduction.
Yeah, this is his moment that we're going to remember him, so, okay, anything else? Jesus said, stop, no more. Okay, that once was enough. That he touched his ear and healed him. Now, if he took off the whole lobe, the whole thing, it's kind of hard to stick that back on and get it healed, but if it's just a chunk off of it, that could be done. It would be healed in the sense of the blood would hold it on there and it'd get, but let's not worry about that. Matthew 26, 51 to 54, let's see what he does with this.
Okay, suddenly, one of those with Jesus put his hand out on his sword, drew it, and struck the slave of the high priest, cutting off his ear. Then Jesus said to him, "Put your sword back in its place, for all those who take the sword will perish by the sword. Do you think that I cannot appeal to my Father, and he will at once send me more than 12 legions of angels? But how then would the scriptures be fulfilled, which say that it must happen in this way?"
Oh, whoa, there's a lot of difference here. What has Matthew added? What's he got? What do you see?
Well, Jesus has been telling them plainly that he must die,
He's just going to be arrested and die.
and
Yeah.
they're not hearing it, of course.
They don't want to hear it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
12 legions of angels would be an adequate force to take on a few.
Yeah, I think that would kind of take him on, yes. So he is certainly claiming to be the representative of God.
With power to appeal to his Father.
Authority
Yeah.
to appeal.
Yes.
Yes. He who takes up the sword shall perish by the sword.
Well, violence begets violence.
Doesn't it? Yeah. It's always the case, often the case. And he says, and here he's being arrested. Here this has been chopped off. Here he starts and does this little monologue of, "Shut up, don't you know I can do this?" And everybody's listening. There's time here. The force that's come out doesn't want to fight. They don't want this. They'd rather everybody, calmly let him go. So they're stopping, they're listening, while Jesus corrects his own disciple. So there is time here. It doesn't happen instantly, okay? And again, he takes up a piece of the right ear. I don't know why, but that was specified in Luke. Right ear, okay? Okay, but the scriptures have to be fulfilled, which say that he's going to have to die. He's going to have to be sacrificed. Okay, anything else? John 18, 10 through 12.
Simon Peter, therefore, having a sword, drew it and struck the high priest's slave and cut off his right ear. And the slave's name was
Malchus.
Malchus. Okay. Jesus therefore said to Peter, "Put the sword into the sheath, the cup which the Father has given me."
Yes,
Is that right?
you're right. You're fine.
Put the sword into the sheath, the cup which the Father has given me. Shall I not drink it?
Go ahead. A little more.
So the Roman cohort and the commander and the officers of the Jews arrested Jesus and bound him.
Okay, what's John put in here?
Well, we know who had the sword.
Now we know it's a Simon,
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Impetuous.
Mr.
Yeah.
Impetuous.
You know,
Go ahead.
I just-
I saw you working at your right and left hand.
yeah, that's really, how did he do that? Because if Malchus is facing him,
Yes.
which you would
Assume.
expect,
Yeah.
then his right ear is going to be over here.
On the left side of the person facing him.
Yeah,
the disciple.
and Peter's right hand here. And
Yeah.
You're making an assumption where Peter was standing.
Well, he could have been left-handed.
I thought that's where she was going.
Well,
Oh,
but
that's true. It could, well,
even if he was right-handed, where was he standing when he struck? If he was offset a little bit, I'm gonna chop his head off and he missed and caught the ear. I mean, who knows?
yeah, it seems very difficult because if he's right-handed,
Uh-huh.
however he does, unless he's doing a backhand, but anything forehand
But
is going to
you're also making the assumption that the slave is standing straight in front of him, Peter.
Right.
Whereas if the slave was in front of Jesus and Peter was off to Jesus' left, that puts the slave off to the right side of Peter. So when he struck, he'd be hitting the right ear.
Okay.
It's fun, it's to think about, but yeah, it somehow, or he's left-handed, and I don't care.
It doesn't affect the story.
Makes no
No,
difference,
it's
but it's just a curiosity, and that's a good one. Positioning might be significant.
Well, see, the other part they don't talk about, but being a former EMT, the head is extremely vascular.
Oh, yes.
And the amount of blood that would have been spewing at that point would have been unbelievable. And it would not have been threatening to his life if he only took a piece off, but it would look like it.
It would still look, yeah.
Yeah, and it would have looked terrible.
And it wouldn't have to be the entire ear, whatever you call that
No,
thing.
not at all.
You could have did just a piece of it, it defracted off of the skull and chopped off the top part of it, bled like heck, and Jesus will reach
Well,
out.
I just always took it for the
That's-
max.
right.
They took the whole ear off, Jesus put his hand over it.
Put the whole ear back
flipped
on.
his back.
Yeah. Whatever.
Malchus
Well,
would
we-
have been very impressed.
I think
Either
Malchus would
way,
have
we
been
know
very-
Jesus could do it.
Yes.
Yes. And that should have alerted something to the people arresting him.
But
The
they'd
power.
already knew and witnessed
Miracles.
healings.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. So whatever.
Which made him dangerous.
Well, I mean, what were they saying? Well, he must be doing this by the devil, by Beelzebul, right? And
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
If Jesus can do this, take a wound from a sword and heal it, his armies would be undefeatable. He's raised someone from the dead. Why? They could go anywhere and there'd be no problem. They could take over the Romans. Doesn't matter if they get killed, Jesus would raise them. If they got chopped up, he'd reattach the parts. If they're hungry, he could feed them from nothing.
Wow, I never
This
thought
guy's-
about it like that.
This guy's everything.
Well,
Scary.
And
Yeah.
realistically, if they're gonna put him to death, what's to keep Jesus from healing himself?
Oh,
You know, I mean, he could rise from the dead.
well, we find that out later too, but he predicted something about that. Okay, anything else here? By now, the disciples were beginning to grasp what was happening. Hello, dawn. Some pulled knives and prepared to defend both Jesus and themselves. Knives, swords, whatever you want to call it. The fourth also began to prepare for a fight. Simon the Zealot slashed out, cutting off the ear of a torch-bearing servant nearby. It turned out his name was Malchus, one who was the slave of Caiaphas. Okay, now I've made a switch that may not be appropriate. I don't think it would be Simon Peter that would have been. It would have been Simon the Zealot, who would have been happy to have that little knife sword thing and would have been more than willing to leap into the fray. It's not necessarily, it's a change of the scripture, it's changing what John tells us. So don't believe it. Okay? I happen to feel it was Simon who did it, but someone stuck Peter on the end of that. I think it was Simon the Zealot. That's my opinion, not scriptural. Thank you. Please, I want you to be aware of that. Okay, but someone named Simon responded, finally, and cut off a piece of or the whole ear. Okay? Any question?
I don't think it matters who did it.
Nope, it really doesn't. Okay, or how much was cut off, doesn't really matter. The only thing that matters is we have faith. It's always stick to that.
In what?
Yes. In God's statements. Here we go. That is enough. Put away the weapon, Jesus said calmly to young Simon. Then Jesus reached up, grasped the sliced ear, repositioned it, and applied pressure to stop the bleeding. That would be standard first aid here. Okay?
Except when Jesus pulled his hand away, you would think it would inspire awe among the people arresting him, but
Yeah. No.
clearly that didn't stop their...
Also, Jesus didn't hold pressure for a very long time. That's not going to happen. I'm not going to let him sit there and say, all right, we'll wait for a while just for this slave. No, I don't care that much about slaves. Okay? It would have been a quick thing. He would have put it back on and healed instantly enough to stay on. Okay? Because time is working against Jesus in this case, against Malchus.
Oh, but also, if you look at Jesus' other healings, you know, the skin was soft like a baby's.
Yeah,
Well, his healing is clearly thorough.
that's right. As it is when he heals us.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Anything else? I could bring down thousands of angels to fight for me if I chose to. But it was important that you used your weapon. Why? Why is it important that a weapon have been used? You hadn't thought about that, have you? What was Jesus to be accused of? A revolution.
Mm-hmm.
Here is proof that his disciples were armed, they were dangerous, they were starting a revolution, a revolt. The weapon is proof of that for the trial. Jesus knew what he was doing. That's why he wanted to make sure there were weapons available. 2, that'll be enough. And one of them got used, and that will help the trial.
And he said, put it away, it's enough.
That's enough. You've used it. That's it. That was it. That's all he needed. Anything else?
Well, he makes the statement about, at any time I could call down angels
Yeah.
and so, when he's hanging on the cross and they're taunting him
Well, it's amazing to
Doesn't
me,
do it.
the soldiers trained as they were, that when that began, their natural instincts as soldiers would have been to follow up.
Yes.
And Jesus' authority was strong enough at that point that they were struck, it sounds like to me, dumb, meaning they couldn't speak.
Uh-huh.
And all of a sudden, thoughts were going through their minds that caused them to not move forward with theirs and caused more bloodshed. That what God simply, or Jesus at that point was the sight of blood, and the process had been completed.
So let's think about what the soldiers were there for.
Stop. Which soldiers are you talking about? The Jews or the Romans? You said soldiers and Roman. I'm talking about the cops, the police of the force for the Jews. That's the force we're dealing with right here. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, we know that there were Roman cohorts
Yes,
there.
absolutely.
But they probably would have been there to make sure that the approach was not just simply a murder, but rather arrest him.
Yes.
As they'd promised.
That was the deal.
And
And
so,
crowd control
they
became that.
were witnesses.
Yes, that's what they were supposed to do. Who is it? These are the temple guard. Now, they're not nearly as well trained as a Roman, which is why I wanted to pause on that one. This is not what they normally do, but they're there to arrest, and they better do it right, because that's what they're being observed for. Okay? So, when he said, I am, ego eimi, Yahweh, they backed off and went, whoa! You remember? Mm-hmm. Now, it's starting to engage. They're hearing him say, I can bring down thousands of angels. They're going, whoa! So, the hesitation is among the temple guard, not the Romans. The Romans are starting to draw their swords, I'm sure, but only as a backup. And this is my opinion. We don't know. Okay? but that makes sense. Therefore, they're hesitant, not nearly as trained as you were thinking. That's my opinion. Okay? And so there's time in which Jesus can do this. They've given him space because he's claimed sonship to God, or being the messenger of God. And so he has time to hook the ear back on and to say to the disciples, cool it. I could take care of this if I wanted. Then they'll proceed. Okay? Any questions? Luke 22, 52 and 53.
Then Jesus said to the chief priests and captains of the temple and elders who had come out against him, have you come out as against a robber with swords and clubs? When I was with you day after day in the temple, you did not lay hands on me, but this is your hour and the power of darkness.
Okay, what has he added? He said, relax, I can bring 1,000 angels if I want. And then he looks back at these officers. They were not involved in this ruckus, whatever it is, thank you. And he said, while I was there, you could have arrested me, but you didn't, because that would have been in the full light of truth, and everybody would have known it. You come out here in the darkness when criminals act, trying to hide what you're doing. So he's really putting them down here. He's really saying it as it is. Any question? Matthew 26, 55 and 56.
At that hour, Jesus said to the crowds, have you come out with swords and clubs to arrest me, as though I was a bandit? Day after day I sat in the temple teaching, and you did not arrest me. But all of this has taken place so that the scriptures of the prophets may be fulfilled. Then all the disciples deserted him and fled.
What has he finally added? What has Matthew added?
Well, he told them why this was happening.
Yeah, to fulfill the scripture.
Yeah.
And then
They all fled.
it was time for the rabbits.
Mm-hmm.
And they rabbited, to use your phrase.
Sure.
They fled.
Well, and that was good for the arresting people. Now we don't have an insurrection.
Right.
All we have to do is take this guy back.
Right, and they didn't try to, they weren't there to arrest all of them. They were specifically told to arrest Jesus only. Mm-hmm. They just didn't want the mess. So this eliminates that nastiness of a big battle. Yes?
And all of the trial and so on that would have to go on for all of these people.
Right. You don't need that. You just want to take off the head, the leader. Okay? Anything else? Anything come to mind? Any thought?
I think that's what bothered Peter so bad, was the fact that he had considered himself to be the leader.
Oh, yes.
And all of a sudden, he no longer felt that power, that strength. He fled, and it continued to follow him throughout at this point.
He felt fear.
Yeah, and I can't imagine when the disciples fled, what was going through their minds. I mean, that would, here all this time they had been supporting, or at least thought they were. When the push came to shove, they were no longer behind Jesus.
I can understand what was in their head. I gotta get out of here.
Well, so in addition to that, in an emergency situation, and I've seen a few, you never know how someone is going to react.
Correct.
Some people are very methodical and go on and do what they need to do. Other people react in a completely different manner.
Correct.
And you aren't ever going to know until the emergency happens.
Especially if it's happening to you.
Yes.
All of a sudden, you have to decide what to do, or your instincts take over. Yes.
Do you have the scriptures that he's specifically alluding to from the prophets?
I don't have them here yet.
Okay.
Sorry.
So looking on here.
You don't see them there either, huh?
Well, not on this.
Yeah.
maybe
We,
the
we,
real
we've all,
Bible would
probably
have it.
most of us have read the Old Testament,
Yeah.
and they're,
You got Isaiah,
numerous places.
Jeremiah,
Yeah.
that'll be standard.
yeah.
Okay, here we go. Mark 14, 51 and 52.
And a young man followed him with nothing but a linen cloth about his body. And they seized him, but he left the linen cloth and ran away naked.
Okay, finally, where is this kid coming from? Now, what do you see here happening? All the 11 are running away. They're taken off. They're headed off. They're leaving. And suddenly, in the Gospel of Mark only, is this little
Young man.
this little thing. This is his autograph. Just as Malchus that was his autograph. There. So what do we have? A young man was in the area. He wasn't wearing just a linen cloth, but he too is going to try to run away.
Well, and so this young man was clearly not one of the 12.
Correct.
He was spying, watching, seeing what check this guy out, right?
Right, exactly. He was there observing.
And he was probably poor. If he was poorly dressed, he was probably poor.
Okay.
And
Or quickly dressed, but yes.
but so that tells you it would be real easy if the clothes don't fit to have somebody grab them and run off without them.
If you're wrapped in a sheet, you're going to lose it.
Yeah.
When they're grabbing at you. Anything else strike you? Okay. Now let's be careful. He would not have run away what we call naked. He would still had his tunic on. That's an undergarment. They didn't take that off.
Yeah.
They took off his outer garment, and they considered it to be naked when you're down to your undergarments. So he's not running nude, okay? He's running away stripped of his outer garments.
Still demoralized.
Oh yes, oh yeah, this is embarrassing at the very least. He's gonna have to run all the way home in his outer garment, his inner garment only.
Well, and depending on his age, it could be horrifying. I mean,
Yep.
some people are just very sensitive about such a thing.
Yes. Okay, let's go on then. As the armored men crowded in with drawn swords and raised batons, many of the disciples fled, including the boy Mark, who had nearly been captured but had squirmed out of his cloak and run off in just his tunic. I couldn't find a proper picture for it, but this is the only thing I can find on the internet. Okay? Any questions or thoughts? Remember I said, who was close enough to Jesus when he was a stone's throw away from the other disciples to hear what he had to say? Hear what he's saying in his prayer. Someone had to hear it. This little guy, I think it's possible that he was close enough to Jesus to hear what he was saying while Jesus was praying in the garden.
So that would make sense that he would be the witness.
Yes.
Okay, so if you study history, you'll find the history that is considered to be the most accurate is history that contains details that don't really matter.
Correct.
And this might fit into that category. Okay, so this happened, but what's that got to do with the story?
It's not important.
Well, it tells you whoever wrote the story
Right.
put everything you could think of down.
Yep. And this is his autograph. This is saying, I was there. Mark. Okay, any questions, thought, or comments? Go ahead.
Isn't there later, was Mark a relative of one of, was he like a relative of Peter or somebody, like a cousin or a
Not that we are
nephew or
aware of,
something? So
no.
he just was,
He was the son of the woman Mary who in the house that he had the Last Supper at.
okay,
So he was there, he was at the supper, and he probably followed them out.
But that's a guess at this point.
Well, no, we know he was related to Mary at the house. But other is speculation, yes. Okay, here we go. Jesus said to the leader of the force, "You came for me as though I were a rebel, when you could have arrested me any time in the temple. Night is your time. I will not resist if you let my men go." Since the leader only had instruction to arrest Jesus and did not want a bloody battle, he quickly agreed. The few remaining disciples quickly moved off when the guard ordered them to leave, and they realized that Jesus did not want them to fight. The guard tied Jesus' hand. Jesus was surrounded by guards and escorted back to the city. Any question, thought, or comment? The next time we get together, Jesus will be questioned by the authorities.
Would Jesus have been, the punishing of Jesus or brutality to him begun when they just walked him back?
No.
That would only begin after?
Yeah. This is
Just
all
struck
right.
me.
Thank you. Next time we get together, Annas will question Jesus.